they laughed at me. I could hear their whispers before they even came near. Greg and Vanessa Reynolds, a rich-looking couple with those smug expressions, leaned over and made sure everyone around could hear them. "Are you sure you belong here?" Vanessa said, glancing at my outfit like it was a costume from a thrift store. I tried to ignore them, focusing on my magazine, but the tension was unbearable. Flight attendants passed by, pretending not to notice, probably afraid to confront someone so obviously entitled. I sat there quietly, my hands folded, forcing myself not to react. Their eyes kept darting toward me, full of judgment. Every little sound I made seemed to draw their attention. A small cough, the rustle of my bag, everything was met with snickers. I felt the heat rising in my chest, the kind that comes when someone tries to strip away your dignity just to boost their own. Around us, other passengers shifted uncomfortably, some glancing at me with curiosity, some with pity, but no one said a word. Then it happened. The flight attendant approached and, in the most polite yet humiliating tone, told me I needed to move to a different seat. "First class is full," she said, even though there were open seats nearby. Greg's face lit up with that self-satisfied grin, and Vanessa gave me a look that was equal parts triumph and mockery. I didn't speak. I just gathered my things and walked toward the back of the plane, feeling every eye on me. Inside, I took a deep breath and tried to calm the storm of emotions. Anger. Embarrassment. A strange sort of disbelief that people could be so cruel without knowing anything about the person they were judging. I wondered if they had any idea who I was, what I had worked for, or how I had gotten here. Of course, they didn't. They never stopped to think about the stories behind the people around them. They were too busy basking in their sense of superiority. I looked around the economy cabin, and it felt like a different world. The noise was louder, the seats smaller, and the smell different. But I carried myself the same way I always did, calm, steady, unbroken. No matter what they thought, no one could take away my history, my achievements, or the hard work it took to build my life. I knew this moment wouldn't define me, but it would fuel me. Every insult, every smirk, every word meant to shame me planted the seeds of something I hadn't felt in a long time, a desire to prove my worth in a way they would never forget. As I settled into my seat, I promised myself I would stay composed. I wouldn't react with anger in the moment, not here, not now. But I made a mental note of their names, their faces, and their arrogance. Every detail. Because someday, they would learn the truth, and the truth has a way of catching up with people who think they can humiliate others without consequences. That day, I realized that my humiliation wasn't the end of the story, it was just the beginning. I shuffled down the narrow aisle, trying not to trip over my bag, feeling every pair of eyes on me. Whispers followed me like shadows. "Who is she?" one passenger murmured. "Why is she in first class at all?" another asked under their breath. The stairs burned hotter than the overhead lights, and I could sense the quiet judgment in every glance. It was a strange mix of curiosity and pity, and it made my chest tighten with a mix of frustration and disbelief. Greg's voice cut through the murmurs, loud enough for nearby passengers to hear. "Are you sure you belong here?" he said again, leaning back in his seat with that infuriating grin. Vanessa laughed quietly, covering her mouth with her hand, as if my discomfort was the funniest thing she had seen all day. I forced my lips into a calm line, giving nothing away. I couldn't let them see how much it hurt. I moved past the seats, feeling the difference immediately. Economy was smaller, more crowded, less comfortable. The hum of the engines felt louder, the space tighter, and the sense of exposure overwhelming. I slid into my seat, trying to adjust without drawing attention, but I knew it was useless. The whispers didn't stop. People nudged each other, stealing glances, and I felt like I was trapped under a microscope. I kept my head high and my expression neutral, hiding every reaction. No one needed to know who I really was, and I certainly wasn't going to let them see me crumble. I had spent years learning how to handle humiliation, how to swallow pride when the world tried to belittle me. Yet, despite the training, a small flame of anger had been lit inside me. It flickered quietly at first, barely noticeable, but it was there. As I sat, I thought about Greg and Vanessa, about how easily they assumed superiority, how quickly they judged me without knowing anything. That assumption, that they were untouchable, sparked something deeper in me. It wasn't just about the seats or the public embarrassment. It was about justice. About showing people that power and respect aren't given, and they certainly aren't earned by arrogance or cruelty. I replayed every moment in my mind, the laughter, the smirks, the audacity. Every detail etched itself into my memory, and with each replay, the desire to make them understand the consequences of their actions grew stronger. I didn't need anyone else's validation, but I wanted them to see the truth someday. By the time the plane leveled off, I had made a silent promise to myself. I wouldn't lash out now, I would endure this moment with grace. But I would make sure they would never forget the day they tried to humiliate me. That day wasn't just about shame, it was the start of a plan, and the first step toward reclaiming control and ensuring that justice would come in a way they could never anticipate. As the plane cruised at altitude, I stared out the window, watching the clouds drift by, and thought about everything that had led me here. They had no idea who I was, no idea what I had gone through to reach this point. Greg and Vanessa assumed I was just another passenger, someone to mock, someone beneath them. They didn't know that the airline they took for granted was mine, built from nothing, piece by piece, with every ounce of determination I had. I remembered being 18 and alone, the world feeling impossibly big and unfair. I had no family, no safety net, just a fierce drive to survive. Every obstacle I faced felt like a test. Society told me I was too young, too inexperienced, too small to make anything of myself. Men in suits dismissed me in meetings, airline executives laughed at my ideas, and people in positions of power assumed I couldn't succeed. But I refused to let their doubts define me. I worked tirelessly, taking odd jobs, learning every detail about aviation, about business, about people. I started small, with a single plane and a handful of employees, but I built it into something bigger than I had ever dreamed, a respected airline that carried thousands every day. The memory of that hard-fought journey strengthened my resolve. Greg and Vanessa had humiliated me in an instant, but they didn't realize their arrogance had given me something they could never take, motivation. I began thinking carefully about how I could respond, not with anger, not with rash action, but with precision. Revenge would not be about cruelty, it would be about strategy. I wanted them to understand what it meant to underestimate someone based on appearances, to treat others as if their worth was measured by wealth or looks alone. I pictured subtle ways to turn the tables, small adjustments that would make them uncomfortable, choices that would show them the consequences of their arrogance without anyone questioning my authority. Every idea I considered was deliberate, every plan layered, a silent assertion of control over a situation that had tried to humiliate me. I refused to rush. Patience would be my ally. At that moment, I realized the humiliation had a purpose I hadn't expected. It lit a fire inside me, a quiet determination that would guide my actions. I wasn't acting out of spite, I was acting out of justice, ensuring that those who believed they could trample on others would see the weight of their arrogance. This wasn't just about a single flight or a single insult, it was about proving that the person they mocked was not someone to be underestimated. And so, I began to plan. Every detail I observed on the plane, every smug expression, every careless comment became part of a mental map of how I could reclaim control. I didn't need anyone else to know what I was doing. This would be a silent operation, precise and calculated, and when the time came, it would be undeniable. The first step toward justice had already begun in my mind, and nothing would stop me from seeing it through. Once the plane landed and the noise of the cabin faded behind me, I slipped back into my normal life as if nothing had happened. On the outside, I was calm. On the inside, I was focused. I didn't rush. I didn't confront anyone. Instead, I did what I had always done best, I gathered information quietly. It wasn't difficult to learn about Greg and Vanessa. People like them leave trails everywhere. Their names appeared in business circles, travel records, and private investment groups. I didn't dig out of anger. I treated it like any other business decision, careful and controlled. I wanted to understand who they really were, not the image they showed in first class. Greg, especially, liked to talk. He was known for risky decisions and loud confidence. As I looked deeper, one detail stood out. He had invested a large amount of money in a small rival airline that was already struggling. It was the kind of gamble that could either make him look brilliant or ruin him quietly. He believed he was ahead of the game, smarter than everyone else. That belief made him careless. I didn't touch him directly. I didn't need to. Influence doesn't always require visibility. Through normal business channels, I adjusted a few things, routes here, partnerships there. Nothing illegal. Nothing suspicious. Just smart moves that strengthened my airline while putting pressure on weaker competitors. The rival airline Greg supported began to feel the strain. Costs rose. Profits shrank. Delays increased. Greg didn't connect the dots. Why would he? From his point of view, the world was simply being unfair. He complained in meetings, blamed managers, and doubled down on his investment, convinced that things would turn around. Every step he took pulled him deeper into trouble. Vanessa followed closely behind him, enjoying the lifestyle his money provided, unaware that the ground beneath them was slowly shifting. Their travel habits stayed the same: luxury flights, expensive hotels, confident smiles. But behind the scenes, the pressure was building. I watched everything from a distance. I never used my name. I never showed my hand. This wasn't about exposure yet. It was about balance. About letting someone feel the consequences of their actions without knowing where they came from. What surprised me most was how easy it was to stay detached. I didn't feel guilt. I didn't feel excitement either. I felt calm. This wasn't revenge fueled by emotion, it was correction. A reminder that power doesn't belong to those who shout the loudest or mock the easiest. As weeks passed, Greg's confidence began to crack. His conversations changed. His posture stiffened. The same man who once laughed at others now looked tense and distracted. He still had no idea who was behind the shift in his fortune. And that was exactly how I wanted it. The lesson wasn't meant to be loud. It was meant to be felt. A few weeks later, I saw my chance. Greg and Vanessa had booked another flight on my airline, completely unaware that I was watching every detail. I didn't need to confront them. I didn't need to be seen. All I needed was to create a situation where they would feel the consequences of their arrogance, and the timing had to be perfect. I arranged for that particular flight to be overbooked in first class. It was a busy day, and every seat was taken, but I made sure every regular VIP passenger would be accommodated properly. That left the Reynolds seats uncertain. I also ensured that no last-minute upgrades were available, so there was no way for them to claim the first-class privileges they expected. As they arrived at the gate, I watched from a distance. Their confident smiles, the casual way they brushed past other passengers, and the way Greg held his head high, all of it was about to be tested. The flight attendants did their jobs carefully, following the rules to the letter. When they informed Greg and Vanessa that there were no first-class seats available for them, their expressions changed slowly from surprise to disbelief. I had planned it this way so that they would realize immediately that something wasn't right, yet they wouldn't know why. Vanessa's hand flew to her mouth, trying to hide panic. Greg tried to assert authority, demanding to speak with a manager, but the rules were firm. I had positioned the VIP treatment for them elsewhere, another flight with full comfort and service, but the humiliation was in that moment, in front of the line, in front of all the passengers who witnessed their frustration. The whispers started, the glances around the gate. Passengers noticed the couple arguing politely but firmly with the staff, the way their confidence wavered under scrutiny. Greg's usual arrogance was slipping, replaced by uncertainty. Vanessa's poise faltered, and I could see her glancing around, hoping someone would help, hoping someone would intervene, but no one did. I stayed hidden, calm, and unnoticed. I didn't need to step forward. Watching them squirm, knowing that their sense of superiority was cracking, was satisfying, but it was not the point. The point was justice. They had humiliated me without cause. Now, they were experiencing the tiniest fraction of that same feeling, public, unexpected, and completely out of their control. Even from afar, I could see the tension rising. Every passenger watching could feel it too. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. The couple who thought they could shame someone in public now faced their own public embarrassment. Their faces were pale, their voices tight, and the smugness I had seen on the flight before was gone entirely. I knew this was just the first step. There would be more lessons, more subtle reminders, but this moment was critical. It was the setup, the stage where they would realize that arrogance carries a price. And as I watched them finally accept their seats elsewhere, I felt the quiet satisfaction of knowing the balance had begun to shift. Karma was no longer invisible, it had arrived. As I watched Greg and Vanessa finally settle into their temporary seats, I leaned back and let myself breathe for the first time in days. The scene had unfolded exactly as I planned, but something else stirred inside me, something deeper than satisfaction. It wasn't just about their embarrassment. It was about me, about everything I had endured to reach this moment. I thought back to the years of struggle, the endless obstacles I had faced. Being underestimated, laughed at, dismissed, it had happened countless times, long before that flight. Each insult, each setback, had felt like a weight on my shoulders. And yet, I had learned to carry it. I had learned to turn humiliation into fuel, disappointment into determination. Every silent moment of endurance, every time I had been overlooked or mocked, had shaped me into someone who could not be broken by words or arrogance. They tried to break me with shame, I whispered to myself, letting the words sink in. But every step I took in silence made me stronger. The memory of that first humiliation on the plane, the whispers, the judging eyes, and Greg's cruel smirk, all of it no longer felt like pain. It felt like proof. Proof that resilience is born in moments when no one is watching, when no one understands, when you have to rely only on yourself. And yet, even as I felt that quiet strength, I knew this wasn't the end. Watching them squirm, seeing the cracks in their confidence, was satisfying, but it also made me realize how far this could go. There was a larger picture unfolding, one that extended beyond a single flight, beyond public embarrassment. This was about ensuring they understood consequences, about teaching lessons in a way they would never forget. The anticipation built inside me. I could feel it, a mix of focus and patience. Revenge isn't instant. Real revenge requires planning, timing, and precision. And although the first steps had been taken, the story was far from over. I could almost hear the possibilities unfolding, each one more calculated, more impactful than the last. For the first time, I let myself smile, not smugly, but with the calm satisfaction of someone who has endured, learned, and grown. The humiliation I had faced, the ridicule, and the subtle injustices of life had not defeated me. They had prepared me. They had shown me the patience needed to act, the clarity required to plan, and the wisdom to execute without exposing my own weaknesses. Sitting there, I realized the truth, this was not just about Greg and Vanessa. It was about proving to myself that strength comes from resilience, and that dignity can never be taken by others, it can only be ignored if you allow it. My revenge was just beginning, but so was a moment of quiet triumph. And as I let my thoughts settle, I knew that every step I had taken, every silent struggle, had led me here. And the rest of the story would be theirs to learn, one carefully measured lesson at a time. The moment arrived a few weeks later, during a high-profile flight event my airline was hosting. It was a gala-style celebration on board, with VIPs, media coverage, and a focus on customer service excellence. Greg and Vanessa, completely unaware of my presence, had booked seats like they always did, expecting the same comfort and recognition they were used to. I entered the first-class cabin quietly, dressed elegantly, walking past the guests who greeted me with polite nods and smiles. I didn't rush, and I didn't need to. The anticipation was mine alone. When I reached the center of the cabin, I asked the crew to pause for a moment so I could speak to the passengers. Everyone turned their attention toward me, curious and polite, unaware of the storm about to unfold. I looked directly at Greg and Vanessa. Their confident expressions faltered slightly as they noticed me for the first time. There was a flicker of recognition, or maybe just confusion, in Greg's eyes. Vanessa's hand flew to her chest instinctively, as if she could already sense something was wrong. I smiled lightly, calm, controlled, and let the silence stretch just long enough for the tension to build. Then I spoke clearly, so everyone on the flight could hear. The airline you disrespected a few months ago? The airline you thought you could humiliate without consequence? I own it. The effect was immediate. Greg's jaw dropped, his arrogance replaced by shock. Vanessa's mouth opened slightly, and she could only stare at me. Passengers nearby gasped softly, whispering to one another as the realization spread. The couple who had mocked someone in public now faced that person with complete authority. I continued, my tone steady. You may not have known me back then, but now, I think it's time you understand that respect isn't assumed. It's earned. And mocking someone without knowing their story? That comes at a cost. Greg stammered, trying to recover his composure, but the words wouldn't come out right. Vanessa tried to pull him aside, whispering hurriedly, but the damage was done. Everyone on the plane had witnessed the reversal of power. The smug couple had been reduced to stunned silence in front of an audience who now understood the full story. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to gloat. The satisfaction came from seeing their certainty crumble, from feeling the quiet shift in authority. For the first time I was in complete control of the situation. My calm presence alone told the story of my resilience, my intelligence, and my power. As I stepped away, letting the flight continue, I noticed how the passengers looked at me, with respect, surprise, and admiration. The couple who had once believed themselves untouchable now knew otherwise. The power dynamic had flipped entirely. In that moment, humiliation was no longer mine. It was theirs. And it felt like justice, silent, firm, and perfectly delivered. After the public reveal, Greg and Vanessa tried to act normal, but the consequences of their arrogance began to hit quickly. On the very next flight they booked, their usual first-class perks were unavailable. Seats were overbooked, schedules changed, and their carefully planned trips faced delays. Each small disruption was a reminder that nothing in life comes without consequences. They looked frustrated and embarrassed, struggling to maintain the air of control they were so used to projecting. Meanwhile, subtle financial consequences followed. Greg's risky investments in the rival airline began to falter further, and I quietly ensured that contracts and partnerships were slightly adjusted in ways that favored my airline while putting gentle pressure on his ventures. The changes weren't drastic, but enough to make a difference. Greg had no idea it was connected to me. Every failed negotiation, every minor financial setback, chipped away at his sense of invincibility. Vanessa, who had once laughed at my appearance, now realized how vulnerable her confidence really was. She became more cautious, less assured, and constantly second-guessed her decisions. The couple's public image began to shift subtly. Friends and colleagues noticed their tense expressions and the unusual problems they faced. Their arrogance had met a quiet but undeniable resistance. Through it all, I remained composed. I didn't need to be aggressive or visible. Every action was calculated, measured, and deliberate. This wasn't about revenge for the sake of anger. It was about balance, about showing that disrespect and mockery toward others carry real consequences. The humiliation was natural, it wasn't forced or exaggerated. It was simply the result of their own behavior meeting someone who refused to be underestimated. My friends and staff noticed the change, too. They admired the restraint I had shown, the cleverness in how I handled the situation without letting emotions take control. They saw how carefully I had orchestrated the events, turning a moment of personal humiliation into a demonstration of intelligence and patience. Many of them were inspired, realizing that strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's silent, subtle, and unstoppable. For me, the satisfaction wasn't in gloating or revenge fantasies. It was in knowing that fairness had been restored. Greg and Vanessa had learned that arrogance and cruelty are never without consequence. The lesson was clear, delivered quietly but firmly. I could see the tension in their faces, the hesitation in their voices, and it reminded me of all the times I had been underestimated and laughed at. At the same time, I focused on the bigger picture. Life was moving forward, my airline thriving, my team loyal and motivated, and I was stronger for every challenge I had faced. Justice had been served, not with violence, not with chaos, but with precision, intelligence, and dignity. The balance had been restored, and the world had quietly taken notice. In the end, Greg and Vanessa's experience became a silent reminder: the people you choose to belittle today may hold the power to change your life tomorrow. And when that power is used wisely, it doesn't need to be loud to be unforgettable. After everything had settled, I took some quiet time to think about what had really happened. The humiliation, the planning, the subtle revenge, it wasn't just about Greg and Vanessa. It was about me, about who I had become through every challenge I had faced. I realized that patience had been my greatest ally. Waiting, observing, and acting only when the time was right had given me control in a situation that once felt powerless. Resilience, too, had shown its value. Every insult, every mocking glance, every setback I had endured in the past had prepared me for this moment. I understood now that strength isn't about reacting quickly or lashing out in anger, it's about standing firm, learning from experience, and using it to make better decisions. The quiet power of perseverance had been the real engine behind everything I accomplished. The true victory wasn't in embarrassing Greg and Vanessa. That was satisfying, yes, but it was secondary. The real triumph was reclaiming my dignity and peace. I didn't need anyone else to validate me. I had survived, grown, and learned to trust in my own judgment. That sense of calm and self-respect was far more valuable than any momentary satisfaction revenge could bring. It was freedom, the ability to move forward without bitterness, with clarity and purpose. I began to think about how I could use what I had learned to help others. I started mentoring younger women in business, sharing my experiences about resilience, perseverance, and self-respect. I told them that setbacks and humiliation are part of life, but they don't define you. What defines you is how you respond, how you grow, and how you use your experiences to build something stronger. Through mentoring, I realized that teaching others was another kind of power. Watching these young women gain confidence, develop strategies, and take bold steps reminded me of my own journey. I could pass on lessons about patience, careful planning, and intelligent action, about achieving goals without letting anger or pride take over. The satisfaction of seeing them succeed was deeper than anything personal revenge could provide. I also reflected on the subtle balance of justice and mercy. Handling the Reynolds situation had taught me that power is most effective when exercised calmly and wisely. Quick reactions might give immediate satisfaction, but thoughtful action leaves lasting results. Life, I realized, rewards strategy and composure far more than impulsive displays of anger. In the end, I felt a deep sense of completion. I had grown stronger, wiser, and more confident in myself. My journey wasn't about proving anything to the world, it was about proving to myself that I could endure, lead, and rise above adversity. And through mentoring, I was extending that power, helping others discover that quiet, steady strength that comes from patience, resilience, and the courage to keep moving forward. True growth, I understood, wasn't about revenge. It was about mastering yourself and using that mastery to uplift others. That, I realized, was the most meaningful victory of all. I watched from my seat as Greg and Vanessa reluctantly left first class, their usual confidence gone. Every step they took was careful, hesitant, as if the world had suddenly reminded them that arrogance doesn't go unchallenged. Passengers around them noticed the change too, their smiles were forced, their voices quieter, and the air of superiority they carried before had vanished. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need to say a word. Seeing them humbled, even slightly, was enough. They had tried to diminish me, to mock me, to make me feel small. And yet, I had not faltered. My strength had always been quiet, built in moments when no one was watching, in challenges that seemed impossible to overcome. The realization settled over me: I never needed them to recognize my worth. I already knew it. The sense of justice wasn't loud or violent. It was steady, deliberate, and undeniable. Every consequence they faced, every small misstep and embarrassment, came from choices they had made, and I had only guided the circumstances. There was no cruelty in my actions, only the satisfaction of balance restored. Watching them leave first class, I felt the weight of all those past humiliations and challenges lift slightly, replaced by a calm clarity. I reflected on how far I had come. From a young woman with nothing, facing the world alone, to someone who had built a successful airline from scratch, who had endured ridicule and dismissal, who had learned patience and strategy. Every trial had shaped me, every setback had strengthened me, and every challenge had taught me how to rise without bitterness. As Greg and Vanessa disappeared down the aisle, I felt a deep sense of closure. The story of their arrogance and my silent resilience had reached its natural end. I had reclaimed my dignity without losing myself to anger. I had demonstrated that intelligence, patience, and quiet strength were far more powerful than impulsive revenge or loud displays of emotion. There was also a subtle lesson for anyone watching this story unfold. Life doesn't always reward loud retaliation or visible anger. True power lies in knowing your worth, in handling challenges with composure, and in letting actions speak louder than words. Those who underestimate you may never see your full strength, and that is okay. Their ignorance doesn't diminish your achievements or your character. I took one last glance at the cabin, at the passengers, at the air that had once felt heavy with judgment, and smiled softly to myself. Justice had been served, not through chaos or confrontation, but through careful strategy and calm resilience. Greg and Vanessa had learned a lesson, the passengers had witnessed it, and I had confirmed it for myself. Strength, dignity, and intelligence are the forces that endure. In that moment, I understood that real victory isn't about humiliating others, it's about rising above, reclaiming peace, and moving forward with confidence. And that truth, quiet but undeniable, is more powerful than any fleeting anger could ever be.